At Athena Productions, we're well known for our work in Unreal Engine, and this project is a great example of how we bring dramatic, story-filled moments to life using modern tools. From the start, our goal was clear: to create a still moment full of tension and storytelling. We wanted to create a moment in time of a unicorn that's fleeing through the woods being hunted by dogs. My name is Ellie Cooper, and I'm the creative director at Athena Productions, a concept art studio working on video games from indie to AAA. And just a quick heads up before we start, if you're enjoying these sort of videos, please remember to subscribe and comment. It really helps us. With that said, let's get started. We began, as always, with a creative brief that is rich in visual references, whether that is videos, photos, or even just snippets that you may have found, text-wise or anything like that. And for us, we used a lot of old master paintings, and we conducted a lot of in-depth research into hunting dogs like greyhounds to ground the concept in authenticity and reality. And one of our key inspirations from the very beginning was the renowned English painter George Stubbs, best known for his masterful depictions of horses. We aimed to channel the expressiveness that he captured in equine faces into our unicorn, along with the dynamic, energetic poses that defined much of his work. For the dogs, we also turned to the old masters, seeking that same sense of movement and anatomical precision. We studied hunting breeds with pronounced musculature, defined bone structure, and expressive features to give the scene a sense of vitality and intent. And as for the unicorn, we chose a classic horse form as our foundation, but adapted it to feel a little bit more wild and untamed, like the sturdy ponies that you sometimes see in the wild. We envisioned a creature with a thicker coat and more robust build, less refined, more rugged. It wasn't supposed to be something that was a very fine build of horse. And while horses were our primary reference, we also drew from the anatomy of goats and rams to enhance the creature's mythic, untamed quality and its sturdiness. If you're familiar with Blocktober, an event in October where level designers share their early blockouts of their levels, you'll recognise this approach we're taking. Blockouts use simple geometry like cubes to quickly lay out a scene before any detail or any textures are added. We follow the same method because it's an effective way to sketch out the scene in a fast, iterative way. It allows us to experiment with layout and structure before committing to finer details. And using basic geometry shapes like cubes or cylinders, we roughly position the key elements such as the unicorn, the hunting dogs, and just the general environment that we're going for. And at this stage, it's all about getting relationships and scale between the elements correct. And once we're happy with the blockout, we begin to move on to the exciting part, sculpting our unicorn creature. Next, we dive into ZBrush for a quick sculpt of the unicorn. This particular artist enjoys using ZBrush, but many others may use 3D Co or Blender to achieve the same result. What you use doesn't particularly matter, it's the end result that does. And modelling this creature, it isn't about perfection or creating the perfect game-ready model at this stage. It's about readability and camera-facing detail. We won't be rotating around the model, we know this already, so we're going to prioritise the areas that matter most to the final image to make sure that we maximise the time spent. And this is where making sure that you nail down your blockout early on and understand what the composition is going to look like is super important. And throughout this stage, we are constantly referring to our anatomy references that we gathered in the beginning, especially the horse's musculature and bone structure, to make the animal feel more grounded in reality. Then we start checking the sculpt in Unreal Engine alongside our dog blockouts to ensure that proportions, readability and silhouette hold up in the final composition. And from there, we'll just keep going back and forth between Unreal Engine and ZBrush, making changes as we go. Once the unicorn sculpt is in a good place, we shift the focus to the environment. Using Megascan's assets, we populate the scene. Megascans is a fantastic resource for us to be able to quickly add to our scene and make it feel realistic without having to go searching elsewhere or without us having to create those 3D models ourselves. And where we may have spent time modelling our creature, we are able to use those pre-made 3D models to regain some of that time back. We begin to layer in the models in the foreground that can give us a bit of depth, blur and realism to the scene, while also beginning to think about the ground around the main action. We don't want it to be flat. We want to make sure that it feels like a forest pathway that has lots of natural bumps, natural rocks, natural rock moss around it. But we also need to consider how the models will look and also fit into the uneven ground too. With the base sculpt complete, we begin adding details. As always, we work from big shapes to small shapes, starting with the overall pose of the creature so that we can establish its composition, its energy, the presence that it has, and also what storytelling comes from that pose. And from there, we can move into finer details, such as sculpting the teeth, shaping the facial features, refining the goat-like fur that hints at a tougher, more resilient creature that's built for survival in the wild, just as we envisioned from the very start. And once the sculpt is finalised, we move on to texturing. We chose a pearlescent coat to evoke the unicorn's magical, ethereal nature. To ground it visually and to add a bit of contrast as well, we gave it darker legs and a shadowed head to subtly guide the viewer's eye towards a key focal point. Next, we add some rough blockouts of arrows embedded in the unicorn, a quiet yet powerful storytelling element. This detail can help make it clear to a viewer that the creature is being hunted by humans, not just being pursued by wild dogs, adding a bit of narrative tension and that little bit extra. And great design often comes down to a series of thoughtful decisions, constantly asking things such as how can we tell the story a bit more clearly? How can we guide the viewer's eye that bit better? How can each element communicate its purpose or meaning more effectively? It's these sort of choices that can help bring an image to life. Now onto the hunting dogs. They must be lean, muscular, and we want to make sure that they look like they are owned by someone rather than being a wild pack of dogs or wolves. And we begin with a base mesh that's straight out of ZBrush, which allows us to quickly block in the forms while exaggerating things such as their muscles and bone structure to emphasize their athleticism. We also add in those gold collars. It's a subtle but telling detail that signals that these dogs are part of a hunting party, likely owned by someone wealthy, suggesting that this hunt is for sport rather than necessity. And to enhance realism and motion, we give the dogs movable jaws and sculpt them in various poses. We don't particularly want to repeat poses over and over with the dogs. You know, sometimes you can rotate or flip them, but we don't want that repetitiveness. We want some that have a different pose just to give more life to the scene. And as with our unicorn, we're mindful of our time. While we're not aiming for hyper-detailed final models, we want strong forms that give us what we need for the 3D. So perspective, lighting and posing. We know that later on we can photo bash those finer details in if they're needed. With any concept art project, staying flexible is key. During reviews and feedback, we decide to lean harder into the fairy tale vibe. We want it to feel a bit more magical in the environment, so adding some gnarled, twisted trees, adjusting the positions of the dogs as well so that they feel like they are converging on the unicorn from all sides, as though they're tightening the net around it to amplify the tension in our scene that much more. As we approach the end of the 3D process, we begin to refine the colour scheme. So we choose a sickly green tone to cast the forest in an eerie, unsettling light. This subtle shift instantly makes the environment feel more haunted and oppressive, which heightens the tension within the scene even more. And mood plays a powerful role in storytelling. If the image was to be bright or sunlit, much of the underlying narrative would be lost. By also controlling the atmosphere, we're guiding the viewer toward the intended emotional response, such as discomfort, danger, worry. You know, we want people to see this image and understand that this is not a happy thing that's happening. It's something that feels very sad and desperate. And to deepen that mood, we also introduce fog and mist. These elements not only amplify the sense of gloom, but also help to create depth to our image, helping us to clearly define the foreground, midground, and background. We also strategically place point lights and spotlights to help us emphasize key elements, such as illuminating the unicorn's horn and face, or highlighting parts of the dogs to make them stand out against the darker background. In scenes like this, it's rarely a single light that's doing all of the heavy lifting. Instead, it's a collection of smaller, thoughtfully placed lights, each one helping to guide the viewer's eye towards what matters, and also away from what doesn't. Once we're ready, we export our render and bring it into Photoshop for that final 10% of polish. This is where we clean up any lingering issues, so quick fixes that are easier to handle in 2D rather than 3D. We might photo bash improvements such as refining the dog's expression, or paint out distracting elements, or soften areas that need a bit more focused flow. It's also the perfect stage to push the image further using adjustment layers, tweaking the contrast, colour balance and lighting, or adding motion blur that enhances the sense of movement and drama, preventing the scene from feeling a little bit too static and awkward. And the result, a magical yet haunting moment, a unicorn that has been caught mid-flight with arrows piercing its body, pursued by trained dogs, all set within an eerie, otherworldly forest. And that's a wrap on this behind the scenes look of how we built a full concept art scene using Unreal Engine, ZBrush and Photoshop. If you found this interesting or helpful, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. We've got plenty more deep dives, breakdowns and creative process content coming your way. Thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.